The conference room went silent except for Brandon Keene's laugh. He held my risk report in the air like it was a paper airplane, waving it around while the leadership team watched. "We're not slowing down because someone's scared of spreadsheets," he said, grinning at the VP of operations. The room erupted in chuckles. My face burned. I'd spent 3 weeks on that report, cross-referencing production logs, safety records, and vendor documentation. Every page was backed by data. Every concern was real. But Brandon hadn't read a single word. He was the CEO's son, newly installed as our operations director, and he treated my work like a joke. I sat perfectly still, hands folded on the table, while he tossed the report aside. It landed face down near the edge of the conference table. What Brandon didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the disaster I documented wasn't theoretical. It was already happening, and I had proof. 3 weeks earlier I'd started pulling the data. Late nights at my desk, coffee going cold while I traced patterns through our manufacturing logs. I was Allison Pierce, senior risk analyst, and pattern recognition was what I did best. I'd been doing it for 7 years at Keene Manufacturing, quietly preventing problems before they became crises. This time the pattern was ugly. Safety checks were being skipped. Verification steps were disappearing from workflows. Quality control reports showed approvals that didn't match the actual inspection dates. I compared timestamps, cross-referenced shipping manifests, pulled archived emails. The more I dug, the worse it looked. Someone was cutting corners to meet aggressive production targets. By week 2, I knew exactly who was pushing those targets. Brandon Keene had arrived 6 months ago with expensive suits and zero manufacturing experience. His first company-wide email had been about velocity and aggressive growth. My stomach had dropped reading it. Before Brandon, this place had been different. I remembered the day I'd caught a materials defect that would have shut down our largest client's production line. My manager had walked me into the CEO's office personally. William Keene had shaken my hand and said, "This is exactly why we hire people like you." I'd felt valued, respected. That respect had died the day Brandon arrived. He'd gathered the operations team in his first week and announced we were drowning in caution. He wanted faster approvals, shorter review cycles, and fewer people saying no. When I'd raised my hand to ask about maintaining quality standards, he'd cut me off mid-sentence. "We're done being afraid," he'd said, staring directly at me. The message was clear. 3 days later, he eliminated the mandatory 48-hour safety review window. Just erased it from the workflow like it had never mattered. I tried warning him privately first. I drafted a careful email outlining my concerns about rushed approvals and missing documentation. I'd requested a brief meeting, kept my tone professional, emphasized that I wanted to help him succeed. He'd responded with 3 words. Noted. Moving forward. No meeting. No discussion. 2 days later I tried again in person. I caught him in the hallway outside his office, report folder in hand. "Brandon, I need 5 minutes to discuss some workflow concerns." He'd glanced at his watch. "I've got back-to-back meetings. Send me the bullet points." I did. He never responded. The third attempt was in a team meeting. I'd barely gotten through my second sentence when he interrupted. "Allison, I appreciate your diligence, but we're not going to let fear drive our decisions anymore." The room had gone quiet. I'd nodded once and sat down. That night I started a new folder on my laptop. I titled it simply, Documentation. My dashboard access disappeared on a Tuesday morning. I'd logged in like always, clicked on the production monitoring system, and hit a permissions error. Access denied. I refreshed 3 times, restarted my computer, checked with IT. The technician sounded confused. "Your credentials are active, but someone restricted your dashboard permissions yesterday. I can't override it without authorization from your division head." Brandon. I was still officially responsible for risk analysis, still expected to file reports and attend review meetings, but now I couldn't see the real-time data I needed to do my job. It was like being asked to drive blindfolded. I walked to Brandon's office. His assistant said he was unavailable. I left a message. He never called back. Instead, I received an email from his assistant 2 days later. Brandon has restructured dashboard access for efficiency. You'll receive relevant data through department summaries. Pre-filtered information that someone else decided was relevant. I sat staring at that email for 10 minutes. Someone was hiding something. The company-wide email arrived on a Friday afternoon. Subject line: Q3 Production Excellence Initiative. Brandon had sent it to everyone, from the executive team down to the warehouse floor. It was full of motivational language about exceeding targets and dominating our market sector. But buried in the third paragraph was a directive that made my hands go cold. All departments will prioritize schedule adherence. Approval workflows causing timeline delays should be expedited or escalated immediately. I read it 3 times. It sounded innocuous. But I knew our internal policies. There were specific procedures for safety and quality approvals that existed precisely because they couldn't be rushed. Brandon's email didn't explicitly tell people to skip those steps, but it created pressure to do exactly that. It was written proof of intent. I forwarded the email to my personal account, then printed a copy from my documentation folder. The paper trail was growing. I thought about quitting. Seriously considered it. Updated my resume, browsed job postings, imagined walking into Brandon's office and dropping my badge on his desk. The fantasy was satisfying for about 20 minutes. Then I thought about the people working the production floor. The machine operators who trusted that their equipment was safe. The quality inspectors who were being pressured to sign off faster. The maintenance crews who flagged concerns that were being ignored. If I left, who would document what was happening? Who would be watching when something inevitably went wrong? I couldn't control Brandon's decisions, but I could create a record. A clear, undeniable timeline showing exactly what warnings were given and exactly who ignored them. I opened a new spreadsheet and started building my documentation system. Dates, times, emails, meeting notes, policy violations. Everything organized, cross-referenced, backed up in 3 locations. I was playing the long game now, and I was very, very good at details. The next leadership meeting was worse. Brandon announced he was reassigning my current project, a comprehensive risk assessment of our new production line, to Kyle Henderson from Quality Control. Kyle was 26, eager to please, and had been with the company for 8 months. Kyle's going to bring fresh energy to this, Brandon said, smiling at him. Sometimes you need someone who isn't weighed down by old assumptions. I felt every eye in the room flicker toward me, then away. Old assumptions. That's what 7 years of expertise had become. I stayed quiet, took notes, nodded when Brandon asked if I had any concerns about the transition. None at all, I said evenly. The meeting ended. Kyle caught up with me in the hallway, looking uncomfortable. Allison, I just want you to know I didn't ask for this. I believed him. You'll do fine, I told him. 3 days later he knocked on my office door. His face was pale. Can I talk to you? Off the record. He nodded. He closed the door and sat down heavily. They want me to approve things I don't fully understand, he whispered. Brandon keeps saying just sign off, we'll handle the details later. I looked at him carefully. What did you tell him? Kyle swallowed. I signed off. That's when I knew this wasn't incompetence. It was systematic pressure. And the risk was bigger than I'd thought. Kyle wasn't the only one feeling the squeeze. Over the next 2 weeks, I had quiet conversations with 3 other people. A safety coordinator who'd been told his reports were too lengthy. A vendor compliance manager who'd been pressured to backdate a certification. A shift supervisor who'd flagged a maintenance issue and been told it was already handled, when it clearly wasn't. Everyone was scared. No one wanted to be the person who slowed things down. Brandon had created an environment where raising concerns felt like admitting weakness. I didn't push anyone to speak up. I just listened and took careful notes afterward, recording what I'd been told without using names. The pattern was undeniable now. Safety protocols weren't failing by accident. They were being deliberately bypassed. And Brandon was the source of the pressure. One night, alone in my office, I pulled up our company's compliance policy manual. It was 200 pages of dense corporate language that most people never read. I'd read it twice. This time I was looking for something specific. I found it on page 73, buried in the whistleblower protection section. One clause stood out like a flare. Employees who identify material risks that management refuses to address have an obligation to escalate through appropriate channels. I read it 3 times. Material risks. Management refusal to address. Appropriate channels. I qualified on all 3 counts. The path forward was suddenly very clear. I decided to give Brandon one final chance. Not because I thought he'd listen, but because I needed it documented that I'd tried every internal option first. I scheduled a meeting through his assistant, marking it as urgent. To my surprise, he accepted. I walked into his office at exactly 2 p.m. on a Thursday, carrying my report folder. Brandon barely looked up from his phone. "What's this about, Allison?" I sat down without being invited. "I need 15 minutes to walk you through serious concerns about our current production workflows. I've identified multiple areas where we're operating outside established safety and quality protocols." He set his phone down and leaned back in his chair. "We've been through this." "Not in detail," I said calmly. "I have documentation of specific incidents and policy violations that require immediate attention." Brandon sighed heavily. "Allison, I respect your dedication, I really do. But you're trying to protect us from ourselves. We're in a competitive market. We need to move fast." I opened the folder. These aren't theoretical concerns. These are actual incidents that have already occurred. He held up his hand. Stop. We're not revisiting every decision because you're uncomfortable with our pace." I closed the folder slowly. "So to be clear, you're declining to review the material risks I've identified?" Brandon's eyes narrowed. "I'm declining to let fear drive our strategy. We're done here." I stood up. "I'll note that in my records." His face hardened. "You do that." I walked out of his office knowing exactly what came next. That sentence, that dismissal, sealed his fate. He just didn't know it yet. That night I finalized the report. 37 pages, meticulously organized. Every claim supported by documentation. I didn't editorialize. I didn't make accusations. I just presented facts. Dates, policy violations, skipped safety steps, pressured approvals, and the predictable consequences of continuing on this path. The opening paragraph was careful and precise. This report documents material compliance risks identified within current production operations. These concerns have been raised through standard management channels and remain unaddressed. Per Company Policy Section 12.4. Escalation to internal compliance is required when material risks are refused review by operational management. I attached every relevant email, meeting note, and piece of evidence. Then I opened our internal compliance portal and began the submission process. My hands were steady. I wasn't angry. I wasn't scared. I was simply following the rules that existed for exactly this situation. The system asked if I wanted to notify my direct supervisor. I selected no. It asked if I wanted to remain anonymous. I selected no. I attached the report, filled in the required fields, and reviewed everything one final time. Then I clicked submit. The confirmation message appeared. Your submission has been received and assigned case number C-2847. A compliance officer will review and respond within 5 business days. I logged off, closed my laptop, and went home. There was no going back now. The first 3 days were silent. Brandon strutted around the office like nothing had changed. He held meetings, sent enthusiastic emails about Q3 targets, and approved expedited timelines that made my stomach twist. I kept my head down and worked on routine tasks, responding to emails, attending meetings I was still invited to. Nobody mentioned compliance. Nobody asked me questions. I started to wonder if I'd miscalculated. Maybe compliance didn't take these things seriously. Maybe Brandon's father would shut it down before it gained traction. Maybe I just ended my career for nothing. On day 4 I got an email. Subject line: KC 2847 follow-up questions. My heart rate picked up. The compliance officer, Patricia Valdez, had questions. Specific, detailed questions. She wanted clarification on 3 incidents, requested copies of 2 additional emails, and asked if I could provide contact information for anyone who might corroborate my timeline. She'd read every page. Every single page. I responded within an hour, providing everything she requested. Her reply came back 30 minutes later. Thank you. This is very thorough. We'll be conducting interviews next week. I sat back in my chair and exhaled slowly. It was real. This was actually happening. The official notice went out on Monday morning. Internal compliance will be conducting a routine operational review of production workflows. Department heads should expect interview requests this week. Routine. That word did a lot of work. It made the whole thing sound harmless, unremarkable. But I noticed how leadership reacted. There was a sudden flurry of closed-door meetings. Brandon was on his phone constantly. The operations VP looked tense. I kept working like normal, responding to the few projects I still had access to, attending team meetings where I mostly stayed quiet. Brandon didn't look at me once during the staff meeting. But I saw him grip his coffee cup tighter when compliance was mentioned. The interviews started Tuesday. Patricia and another compliance officer set up in a conference room and began calling people in one by one. Carl went first. He was in there for 45 minutes. When he came out, he looked shaken. The safety coordinator went next. Then the vendor manager. By Wednesday, everyone was nervous. The questions weren't routine. They were surgical. People started comparing notes in hushed conversations. Compliance was asking about specific dates, specific emails, specific decisions. They weren't fishing. They already knew what they were looking for. They were just confirming it. Brandon's interview was Thursday afternoon. He went in confident, tie perfectly knotted, that easy smile on his face. He was in there for 90 minutes. When he came out, the smile was gone. I was at my desk when he walked past. He didn't look at me, but I saw his jaw working. Something had rattled him. Friday morning, Patricia requested a meeting with me. I walked into the conference room expecting questions. Instead, she thanked me. Your documentation made this process significantly easier, she said. We've been able to verify every major concern you raised. I kept my expression neutral. I just reported what I observed. She nodded slowly. You followed protocol exactly as written. That's important. There was a weight to how she said it. A warning, maybe. Or reassurance. What happens next? Asked. Patricia folded her hands on the table. We complete our interviews, compile our findings, and present them to executive leadership. After that, it's out of my hands. I paused. But Allison, you should know that some of the language in your report triggered external reporting obligations. Once certain regulatory thresholds are documented internally, we're legally required to notify outside agencies. My stomach dropped. I didn't realize. I know, she said. But it's important you understand. This isn't just internal anymore. It can't be quietly resolved. She stood up. You did the right thing. Not everyone would have had the courage. After she left, I sat alone in the conference room for 10 minutes, processing what she'd said. I'd thought this would stay contained within the company. I'd been wrong. The scope had just expanded beyond anything Brandon or his father could control. The walls started closing in over the weekend. Monday morning, I arrived to find I'd been removed from 2 more project teams. No explanation. Just a calendar notification that I was no longer required for certain meetings. My email access to the operations distribution list was revoked. I could still receive messages sent directly to me, but I was cut off from group communications. It was isolation by degrees, making me a ghost without technically firing me. Tuesday, Brandon's assistant delivered a message. I was to remain available for compliance inquiries but minimize involvement in operational discussions until the review concludes. Minimize involvement. Corporate speak for stay invisible. I knew what they were doing. They were building a narrative where I was the problem. The paranoid analyst who cried wolf. The troublemaker who didn't understand business realities. If compliance found nothing, I'd be quietly pushed out. And if they did find something, I'd be the convenient scapegoat who failed to raise concerns properly. Except I had documentation proving I'd raised concerns repeatedly. And Patricia had confirmed they'd verified everything. I wasn't scared. I was angry. But I channeled that anger into something productive. I organized my documentation folder one more time, backed it up to 2 additional cloud services, and drafted a detailed timeline of every interaction since Brandon arrived. If they tried to rewrite history, I'd have receipts. Wednesday afternoon, William Keene himself called an emergency leadership meeting. I wasn't invited, but word spread fast. The CEO had decided to address the compliance situation directly. People were nervous. Brandon had barely been seen all week. The meeting lasted 3 hours. When people finally emerged, they looked exhausted. I caught fragments of conversations in the break room. William had framed the whole thing as a misunderstanding, an overreaction to standard business decisions. He'd emphasized the importance of team loyalty and not letting internal disagreements damage the company's reputation. Felt like the end. Like power was simply going to will this away. I went back to my desk and stared at my computer screen, wondering if I'd made a massive mistake. Then my phone buzzed. Text message from Kyle. They asked if Brandon pressured anyone. I told the truth. So did 3 others. I looked at that message for a long time. Then another text arrived, this one from the safety coordinator. Compliance mentioned external regulators. William went pale. Something had shifted in that meeting. Something William couldn't control. I pulled up my email and found the compliance portal confirmation from my original submission. I reread the language I'd used in my opening paragraph. The specific terms. Material risks, safety protocol deviations, unaddressed management concerns. Patricia had said those words triggered external obligations. Reporting requirements that the company couldn't ignore or bury. I'd chosen that language carefully, pulling it directly from regulatory guidelines. I'd known exactly what I was doing. The rule Brandon didn't know, the one his father couldn't override, was already in motion. The regulatory notification went out Thursday. I only knew because Patricia called me directly. I wanted you to hear this from me first, she said. Based on the compliance review findings, we've filed required notifications with the Occupational Safety Administration and the State Manufacturing Board. My hands went cold. When? This morning. It's standard procedure when internal reviews identify potential safety violations. We're legally obligated. Pause. William Keene was notified simultaneously. I could imagine his reaction. What does that mean practically? Patricia's voice was careful. It means external auditors will likely initiate their own investigation. Our internal review becomes part of their record. We can't retract or modify our findings now. I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat very still, understanding what had just happened. The moment Patricia filed those notifications, this stopped being a company matter. It became a regulatory issue with legal implications. William couldn't make it disappear. He couldn't reframe it as an internal disagreement. Government agencies were now involved, and they didn't care about family loyalty or corporate politics. They cared about compliance with safety laws. Brandon had gambled that his father's authority would protect him. He'd lost. By Friday morning, the entire mood of the office had changed. Projects were frozen pending review. Department heads were in constant meetings. Legal was suddenly everywhere. And Brandon was absent. Just gone without explanation or announcement. I kept my head down and responded to the few remaining emails in my inbox. Nobody spoke to me directly, but I felt the shift. The whispers. The glances. People were starting to understand what had happened. And why? Monday brought the first real crack in Brandon's armor. A company-wide memo announced that Brandon Keene was taking a temporary leave of absence to focus on strategic initiatives. Strategic initiatives. The euphemism was paper-thin. Everyone knew what it meant. He'd been removed. Not fired, not publicly disciplined, but removed from operations. William was trying to contain the damage without completely burning his son. But the damage was already done. Tuesday, external auditors arrived. Two stern-faced people from the state regulatory board set up in the main conference room and began requesting documentation. Production logs, maintenance records, safety inspection reports, approval workflows. Everything I'd flagged in my original report. They interviewed me for 3 hours. Asked detailed questions about specific incidents, specific dates, specific conversations. I answered everything honestly, precisely, without emotion. I showed them my documentation folder. They took copies of everything. One auditor, a woman named Victoria with steel gray hair, reviewed my timeline carefully. Then she looked up at me. "Ms. Pierce, you followed reporting protocol exactly as prescribed. That's unfortunately rare in these situations." I didn't know how to respond to that. "I just did what the rules required," I said finally. She nodded. "Most people don't. They worry about consequences. You worried about compliance." After they left, I went back to my desk feeling hollowed out. I'd done the right thing. I knew that. But the weight of it was crushing. Brandon called me Wednesday evening. I almost didn't answer. The number wasn't saved in my phone, but I recognized the area code. Against my better judgment, I picked up. "Allison." His voice was tight. "We need to talk." I said nothing. "This situation has gotten out of control," he continued. "You submitted a report that triggered a regulatory nightmare. Do you understand what you've done to this company?" Kept my voice level. "I submitted a report documenting material risks that you refused to address. That's what the company policy requires. You could have come to me again. Given me another chance to review your concerns." I almost laughed. "I gave you multiple chances. You dismissed every single one." Silence. Then, "Okay, fine. You made your point. Now help me fix this." That caught me off guard. "What?" "The regulators are asking questions I don't have answers for. You know the workflows better than anyone. Help me respond to their requests. Help me show them this was just miscommunication." I understood then. He wanted me to rewrite history. To soften my statements, to frame his decisions as reasonable, to make the violations seem less severe. "No," I said quietly. Brandon's voice sharpened. "No. I'm not going to change my documentation or minimize what happened. I reported facts. Those facts remain true. You're really going to let this destroy the company? Destroy my father?" "I'm not destroying anything," I said. "I'm telling the truth. What happens next is consequence, not destruction." He hung up without another word. I sat holding my phone, hands shaking slightly. That conversation would probably cost me what little standing I had left. But I wasn't going to lie. Not now. Not after everything. The board meeting happened Friday. I wasn't there, but I heard about it afterward from multiple sources. The story was remarkably consistent. Compliance had presented their timeline. A detailed minute-by-minute breakdown of every warning I'd given, every dismissal Brandon had made, every policy violation that had occurred under his leadership. They'd brought printed copies of emails, meeting notes, documented conversations, the production logs showing skipped safety checks, the vendor statements refusing to backdate certifications, the employee interviews confirming systematic pressure to rush approvals. Patricia had apparently spent 45 minutes walking through my original report, point by point, showing how every concern I'd raised had been verified through independent investigation. One board member had asked why this hadn't been addressed earlier. William had tried to deflect, talking about competitive pressures and the need for operational flexibility. Another board member, a woman named Caroline who'd been on the board for 15 years, had cut him off. With respect, William, this isn't about operational flexibility. This is about your son ignoring documented risks and pressuring employees to violate safety protocols. We have regulatory agencies involved now. This is beyond internal management. The room had gone silent. William had looked at his son. Brandon had tried to argue that I'd exaggerated concerns, that I was resistant to change, that this was a personality conflict blown out of proportion. Caroline had held up the compliance report. This isn't personality. This is documentation. 37 pages of it. The vote was unanimous. Brandon would be removed from operational leadership immediately. William hadn't fought it. He couldn't. The liability was too large, the evidence too clear. After 17 months, I'd won. But I didn't feel victorious. I just felt tired. Monday morning I got a call from HR. My stomach dropped when I saw the name on my screen. But the conversation wasn't what I expected. Allison, we wanted to discuss your status moving forward. I braced myself. The board has asked us to clarify your role given recent events. They want to ensure you feel supported. Supported. That was new language. What does that mean practically? The HR director, a careful woman named Angela, chose her words precisely. It means your position is secure. You followed proper procedures in a difficult situation. The board recognizes that. I didn't trust it. And operationally, we're restructuring the risk analysis function to report directly to the compliance department rather than operations. You'd be leading that restructure. If you're interested, process that. Direct reporting to compliance meant independence from people like Brandon. It meant my warnings couldn't be buried or dismissed by operations managers trying to hit production targets. It meant actual authority. I need to think about it, I said finally. Angela's voice softened. Take your time. But Allison, you should know that you have options now. People are paying attention to what you did here. After we hung up, I sat at my desk feeling unmoored. People are paying attention. I'd spent 7 years being ignored. Now suddenly I had options. The irony was sharp enough to cut. That afternoon my personal email dinged. Subject line: Risk Management Opportunity. A company I'd never heard of was reaching out, asking if I'd be interested in discussing a senior director position. They'd heard about my professional integrity through industry channels. I stared at that email for 5 minutes. Industry channels. Word was spreading. I wasn't just Allison Pierce, the analyst who'd been dismissed in meetings anymore. I was Allison Pierce, the analyst who'd been right. I made my decision over the weekend. Monday morning, I walked into Angela's office with a resignation letter. She looked surprised. You're leaving. I am, I said calmly. This company needs to rebuild its culture. I don't think I can be part of that rebuild. Too much history. Angela nodded slowly. I understand. Can I ask where you're going? I smiled slightly. Somewhere that already values risk analysis. She didn't push. We discussed transition timelines, exit procedures, documentation handoff. It was all very professional and remarkably painless. Tuesday, William Keene asked to meet with me. I almost declined, but curiosity won. I walked into his office for the first time in 6 months. He looked older, tired. Allison, I owe you an apology. Waited. I should have listened when you raised concerns. I let family loyalty cloud my judgment. That was wrong. It was a decent apology. Probably written by a lawyer, but decent. I accept your apology, I said. But it doesn't change anything. He nodded. I know. I just wanted you to hear it directly. He paused. For what it's worth, you did the right thing. Even if it hurt. I stood up to leave. At the door I turned back. Mr. Keene, the right thing shouldn't hurt this much. If it does, that means something in your system is broken. I walked out before he could respond. 2 weeks later I cleared out my desk. 7 years of work, memories, relationships, all packed into 3 boxes and a shoulder bag. The office felt different, quieter. Brandon was gone, officially, pursuing other opportunities. Several managers had been reshuffled. The culture was changing slowly. But I didn't need to be there to see it happen. I'd done my part. I'd told the truth when it mattered. The rest was up to them. My new job started in March. A mid-sized logistics company with operations across 3 states. They'd created a position specifically for me. Director of Risk and Compliance. I reported directly to the CEO. And my recommendations carried actual weight. The first week, I sat in on an operations meeting where someone proposed cutting a quality check to meet a tight deadline. I felt my stomach tighten, that familiar tension rising. But this time when I said, "That creates unacceptable risk," the room went quiet. And the CEO nodded. "Allison's right. We adjust the timeline, not the quality standards." Just like that. No argument. No dismissal. No jokes about being afraid of spreadsheets. I almost didn't believe it. Over the following months, I built out a risk management framework that the entire company actually used. Managers asked for my input before making operational changes. When I flagged concerns, people listened. Felt surreal. Sometimes I'd catch myself waiting for the other shoe to drop. Waiting for someone to laugh at my reports or tell me I was overthinking. It never happened. I'd landed in a place that valued exactly what I offered. Careful analysis, attention to detail, unwillingness to cut corners. Meanwhile, through industry contacts, I heard occasional updates about Keen Manufacturing. They'd settled with the regulators, paid significant fines, implemented new oversight structures. William had stepped back from day-to-day operations. The company survived, but it was changed, smaller, chastened. Brandon had moved to another state. He was reportedly consulting now, helping other companies with operational efficiency. I wondered if he'd learned anything. Probably not. In June, I got an unexpected email. The Society of Manufacturing Compliance Officers was hosting their annual conference. They wanted me to speak on a panel about internal reporting and whistleblower protections. "Your case has become something of a reference point in our field," the organizer wrote. "We'd love to hear your perspective." I almost declined. I didn't think of myself as a whistleblower. I just followed company policy. But after talking it over with a friend, I accepted. The panel was terrifying. 300 compliance professionals staring at me while I explained what I'd done and why. I kept it simple. Document everything, follow established procedures. Don't let fear of consequences override your responsibility to report real risks. Afterward, a dozen people approached me with their own stories. Analysts who'd been ignored. Managers who'd been pressured to sign off on questionable decisions. Engineers who'd raised safety concerns and been sidelined. Most of them hadn't reported it. They'd stayed quiet, afraid of retaliation or being labeled difficult. "What you did," one woman told me, "gave me permission to do the same thing at my company." I thought about that conversation for days. I hadn't set out to be an example. I'd just been trying to do my job correctly. But somewhere along the way, that simple act of following the rules had become something larger. A reminder that systems only work if people use them. That policies only matter if someone has the courage to enforce them. A year after I submitted that compliance report, I was sitting in my new office reviewing a risk assessment when my phone buzzed. LinkedIn notification. Someone had tagged me in a post. Clicked through, curious. It was from an industry training group. They'd created a case study module on internal reporting procedures. The example they used: my situation at Keen Manufacturing. They'd anonymized some details but kept the core structure. An analyst who documented risks, exhausted internal options, then escalated to compliance following proper procedures. They highlighted the importance of detailed documentation, professional communication, and understanding regulatory triggers. The final slide showed the outcome: regulatory investigation, leadership accountability, systemic changes. The caption on the LinkedIn post read, "This is how proper risk management works. Not every hero wears a cape." Some carry spreadsheets. I closed the app and looked out my office window. It was strange, being the cautionary tale that actually ended well. The story people told to prove that following the rules could work. Because honestly, there were plenty of versions where it didn't. Where the analyst got fired. Where the company buried the report. Where nothing changed. I gotten lucky in some ways. Landed in the right place at the right time with the right documentation. But I'd also made choices. I'd chosen to document rather than ignore. To escalate rather than quit. To tell the truth rather than protect myself. And in the end that had mattered. Brandon had laughed at my report. Called me afraid of spreadsheets. Dismissed my concerns as overthinking. He'd assumed that power and privilege would protect him from consequences. He'd been wrong. I never raised my voice. Never leaked documents to the press. Never tried to destroy anything. I simply told the truth to the people who were required by law to listen. And then I let the system work exactly as it was designed to. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes quiet persistence beats loud confidence. Sometimes the person everyone dismisses turns out to be the one holding all the cards. I leaned back in my chair and smiled. Brandon had taught me something valuable, even if he never intended to. He'd taught me that my competence didn't require anyone's validation. That I could trust my own judgment even when powerful people disagreed. That doing the right thing, the careful thing, the documented thing was its own form of power. And that power, unlike his, couldn't be taken away by someone's father or revoked by an executive decision. It was mine. Built on 7 years of expertise, 3 weeks of careful analysis, and 37 pages of truth. He'd waved my report in the air like a joke. Now it was required reading.